tonight.
Oh, no, this can't work. But he's brown and Muslim. He can't win.
An oil company can come through and even against your will, take your property.
It's incredible when you think about it, the fact that Notre Dame has survived for 850 years.
Four years after flight MH370 went missing with 239 people on board, investigators still don't know what happened. Malaysian authorities released their 1,500-page report on the plane's disappearance, which disproved theories that the pilot was suicidal or that the plane suffered a mechanical failure. But the report doesn't rule out everything.
No matter what we do, we cannot exclude the possibility of a third person or third party or unlawful interference.
Wildfires across California have killed at least 8 people, including 2 firefighters and 2 children. The largest blaze, known as the Car Fire, ripped through the city of Redding, just north of Sacramento, forcing tens of thousands of people to evacuate their homes. The most senior Catholic priest convicted of covering up child sexual abuse has resigned. Australian Archbishop Philip Wilson was sentenced to 12 months detention earlier this month, and he's planning to appeal. On Saturday, Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, the former Archbishop of Washington, submitted his resignation to Pope Francis following allegations of sexual abuse. U.S. military officials confirmed for the first time that they've been using armed drones in Niger. The country's government granted American forces permission to arm their drones last November, after an extremist attack in western Niger killed 4 U.S. soldiers. Over the weekend, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, the Democrat who shocked Joe Crowley in New York, campaigned far from her home turf to support another candidate pushing the party to the left.
So I'm deeply honored that you're here. I really appreciate it.
Abdul El-Sayed is running for governor of Michigan. And with fresh backing from Ocasio Cortez and Bernie Sanders, he's hoping to make history in Michigan's August 7th primary, both as a progressive and a Muslim.
Nice to meet you. James, nice to meet you. Who here believes we need new blood in places like Lansing and D.C.? Let me hear you.
Abdul El-Sayed is an Ivy League-educated doctor who ran Detroit's health department at just 30 years old. But for many voters, he's already been defined by one thing.
I don't look like the usual candidate for governor. After all, they always tell me, Abdul, it's not that we disagree with what you have to say. It's just that you're a little bit young. You're also a little bit brown and a little bit Muslim. How's that gonna work out for you?
Can you explain to me what you're trying to do there when you diffuse the situation at the top with like a joke about it?
Being able to dispense with the clear differences and frankly other people's discomfort with those differences via humor is always an easy way to get us to the core.
I respect what you're doing and what you're backing, and I wish you luck. I'm a vote for you. So,
It means a lot to me.
Can I get a picture?
I would love that. Let's do it.
El-Sayed is one of a wave of Muslim American candidates running for office in 2018. Nearly 90, according to a Washington Post analysis. If he wins, he'd be the first Muslim American governor in American history. But even here, in the state with the largest number of Muslim American residents in the nation, El-Sayed says he's facing discrimination over his religion from both parties.
I have very deep concerns around that. Obviously, in regards to Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, he's got tangible affiliations with Muslim Students Association.
That's Patrick Kolbeck, one of El-Sayed's Republican opponents. He says his concerns have nothing to do with El-Sayed's religion.
You guys go off and look at Muslim Students Association across the nation, you'll find that they've had Al-Qaeda leaders speaking to their people.
He was the vice president of the Muslim Students Association, which was formed by the Muslim Brotherhood in 1963.
Now, Abdul has responded to that and directly refuted any affiliation with the Muslim Brotherhood, and he's also pointed out that the college association he was president of no longer has any affiliation with it.
No longer has association, all right.
Right.
Did he ever say the credo that Allahu Akbar, jihad is my spirit, I will die to establish Islam? That's been done at national assemblies where they've had regional assemblies where that is on tape. It doesn't take much to go off and Google that and find examples of that being spouted at at different organizations, and I'd be curious if he's ever gone off and professed that.
The Muslim Students Association was started in the 1960s by people with some ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. But an expert in Islamic studies told Vice News that the two no longer had any direct connections. And though some al-Qaeda members have allegedly been active in MSA, the group has no official ties to the terrorist organization.
Could we just have another round of applause for the candidates for being here?
On the Democratic side, El-Sayed says party leaders were already skeptical whether he could win, as the anti-establishment progressive.
I'm running this campaign without touching a dime of corporate money because I know every single dollar that flows into our system is a dollar that puts folks like you behind.
He also accused Democratic Party leaders of launching a whisper campaign about his religion.
You can imagine these folks in power being like, oh, no, this can't work. But he's brown and Muslim. He can't win.
So you think it's really because they think you're unelectable?
I literally had, we'll just say very powerful people who call a lot of shots in the party, sit me down and say, we think you're great. You're just, it's not that we're racist. It's just that we think people outside of Southeast Michigan are racist, and so you can't win. See? Makes sense. And you're like, no, not how it works. Thank you. And if you think I'm ever going to stop, you got the wrong guy.
We've got a responsibility to stand up and act, and I believe deeply that we can do it.
The Michigan Democratic Party didn't respond to a request for comment on El-Sayed's claims, and they did denounce Kolbeck's allegations. So did one of El-Sayed's primary opponents. But the other, Shri Tanadar, dodged questions about them. Did you think it was appropriate for the Republican to raise those issues in the race?
I am focused on my race, and I'm focused on my candidacy, and my focus is taking Michigan to the next level.
Well, the Democratic Party and your other opponent, Gretchen Whitmer, both denounced the Republicans' claims. So I just wonder why you're not willing to denounce
Well,
them.
I'm focused on taking our state to the next level. And I think the important issues are that we talk about education, we talk about infrastructure.
So you don't think it was inappropriate for the
I
Republican
gotta go
races?
because I have a thing and then we have a meeting.
Sure.
But thank you so
for
much.
your time. Are you a member of the Muslim Brotherhood?
No.
Are you or anybody in your family affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood?
No.
And are you part of some conspiracy to bring Sharia law to the U.S.?
No.
Okay. What do you make of the fact that these are questions being asked about you in your race?
Look, it is frustrating. I'm running to be the best governor for my state, the state where I was born, the state where I was raised, the state where I went to college, the state where I'm raising my daughter, the state that my wife and I have chosen to call home. These questions are going to persist. So I don't think I'm frustrated as much as I'm resigned to the facts of the world.
On January of 2019, you know who's going to be watching? Donald J. Trump. And you know what he's going to be seeing? A Muslim Arab-American doctor getting elected governor in a state that he barely won. Good luck in 2020, sir. Good luck.
Still, even some of his own supporters are worried about how his religion will affect his campaign.
His race, his religion, all of it is something, unfortunately, in the West Michigan area that is not well accepted.
Have you guys seen anti-Muslim sentiment? Is that something?
Oh, absolutely.
Like what?
I put the Abdul sign out in the yard, and the first thing I think is, okay, who's gonna, come through and like drive over it or something? I mean, that's the first thing I worry about.
And it is creating unique problems for his campaign. They've received death threats. El-Sayed wouldn't let Vice film the exterior of his campaign office, out of concern for staffers' safety. But that's part of why he's running.
Part of what comes with being Muslim is a deep faith. And in our faith, we spend a lot of time reflecting on mortality. So you're going to die sometime. And hey, it'd be a pretty epic way to go out fighting for the things that you believe in.
So you have thought about the prospect?
I thought a lot about it.
Because of this campaign?
Yeah. I mean, I know I do this at no uncertain risk to myself. And frankly, the people around me. But that's the thing. Life is about moving forward. And I know that I don't want my daughter to grow up in a world where seeing a political sign with the name Abdul on it is any different than seeing one with the name Steve on it.
You'd think the prospect of a Muslim running for governor of a state President Trump won would be the biggest fear for a certain kind of conservative in 2018.
The people of Michigan have voted. The people of Michigan.
But the woman Abdul El-Sayed campaigned with this weekend is someone people on the right seem to find far more terrifying.
She won with the assistance of the Democratic Socialists.
Medicare for all, free college tuition.
And she's politically naive enough to have told the truth.
Alexandria Ocasio Cortez shocked Democrats when she defeated one of their party's leaders in a primary last month. Conservatives in this country just can't stop talking about her. She's the 2018 supervillain. From June 26th, when she won her primary, through Sunday night, Ocasio Cortez has been mentioned at least 291 times on television. That's according to archive.org. That's more than 7 times as often as New York's celebrity candidate for governor, Cynthia Nixon. And the network where Ocasio Cortez has come up the most was Fox, with 119 mentions. The Daily Caller has published nearly 20 articles on Ocasio Cortez in the past 9 days, calling her a socialist darling and using headlines like AOC equates ending slavery to electing Democrats. One of their reporters was almost sucked in by Ocasio-Cortez's hypnotic superpower.
They talk about education for your kids, health care for your kids, the things that you want. And, you know, if you're not really paying attention to how they're going to pay for it or, you know, the rest of that, it's easy to fall into that trap and say, my kids deserve this.
But Ocasio-Cortez is not the first Democratic socialist to run for office recently. In fact, just a couple years ago, one ran for president and did pretty well. Yet almost no one on the right covered Bernie Sanders like he was Dr. Doom. Jeff Weaver was Bernie's campaign manager in 2016. When he's not running campaigns, he runs Victory Comics in Falls Church, Virginia. Like, I'm in your comic book store, and I'm thinking, like, you know, they sort of treat Bernie like Two-Face, but like Ocasio-Cortez is like the Joker, like the super villain.
Bernie is well defined in people's minds. I mean, if you call somebody in Nebraska or Wyoming or Idaho or California or New York and say, tell me about Bernie Sanders, look, they all know who he is. They all have an impression of him. They all have a sense of what he stands for. And she's new and undefined. And so, yes, they're going to try to turn her into a caricature, use a comic book term.
Right. What do you think this means for this rising tide of democratic socialism, to have a person like Ocasio-Cortez vilified to such a degree?
Well, look, I think what it says is that we're winning, right? I mean, when you're not winning, they ignore you. You know, they tried to pigeonhole it as like these young white Bernie bros, right? Well, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not a young white Bernie bro. So this movement has no boundaries. There are no racial boundaries. There are no gender boundaries. There are no gender orientation boundaries. And there are no geographic boundaries, right? It's winning all over the country. And this to them is terrifying.
They would love to tell voters that what Democrats want is to turn the country into Venezuela.
But that's a fantasy of theirs, right? I mean, but the reality is that this is what we in the progressive movement want to talk about. We want to talk about healthcare. We want to talk about a $15 minimum wage. We want to talk about the fact that you have aging parents and you're trying to figure out how you're going to be able to afford to take care of them, or young kids and how you're going to be able to put them to college. These are the issues we want to talk about. And if Republicans want to talk about those issues, let's have that discussion.
So getting the badge of villainy is sort of like a sign that things are going well.
Oh, it's going great. Yes, exactly. The louder they're screaming, the better it's going.
The final segment of a pipeline system that connects Dakota's oil fields to the Gulf Coast, called the Bayou Bridge Pipeline, is currently being built across a Louisiana swamp. Not surprisingly, many landowners don't want the pipeline in their backyards. But Louisiana is a unique place for oil and gas companies. If they say they need your backyard, they can have it.
I think that's what's both alarming and unknown in the state of Louisiana, that an oil company can come through and even against your will take your property.
Activist groups opposing the Bayou Bridge Pipeline, including one that calls itself the Bucket Brigade, are challenging Louisiana property laws and coming up against a culture they say is loyal to oil.
The oil industry is almost a cultural force at this point in Louisiana. They've been in the state for a century. We have discovered that there really is no regulation or oversight over private companies' use of eminent domain. I think that's where Bayou Bridge can be a real turning point in this state, because for the first time ever, we are going to explore in a courtroom this abuse of eminent domain.
Eminent domain means forcing a landowner to give up a piece of their property in exchange for a court-ordered compensation. The government does it to build public infrastructure, and occasionally, private companies do too. In Iowa, for example, the Utilities Board gave the Dakota Access Pipeline permission to use eminent domain, a decision landowners appealed but ultimately lost. But in Louisiana's interpretation of the rule, all oil pipeline projects are automatically authorized to take private land.
Okay, so this started a couple of years ago when the landman showed up at our house to tell us the pipeline was going to be running through the property. And like my husband
Bayou Bridge's 162-mile route crosses Pat Trahan's property. Her family was concerned about the potential for oil spills. Bayou Bridge Pipeline's parent company, Energy Transfer Partners, told us that in 2016, 99.99% of the company's products were delivered safely. The Trahans tried to negotiate. Instead, they were threatened with a lawsuit. When did you get the letter that threatened eminent domain?
Oh, about a year ago. It just sounded like they have more lawyers than we could, and they'd eventually win. So
they basically wanted to just wear you down.
Oh, that's what they did.
So what's this area back here?
This is the pipeline. Part of the pipeline that's not in the ground yet, and it's not encased in concrete because it's not going under where we had water before and where my husband...
The pipe will restrict how the family can use their land for decades. Their pond had to be drained, and they're prohibited from building any structures on top of it, including a trailer that their son planned to live in.
We won't be able to put the crawfish pond back on. We won't be able to put that house, the trailer back on here, and they will forever have use of the land here.
We found at least 14 cases filed against landowners and spoke to 3 families. Many chose to avoid a legal battle and settled. In a rare example that escalated to a hearing, Bayou Bridge sued 33 people at once, claiming they couldn't locate them to negotiate, saying, quote, "These are defendants which had bad addresses or had no addresses at all." But the judge wasn't having it. It turned out he knew several of the defendants and even played golf with one of them. Ultimately, he ruled in favor of Bayou Bridge Pipeline. A price was set based on an agreement the company had reached with other non-absentee owners on the same plot of land. We reached out to 34 Louisiana legislators to ask whether they think property owners' rights are protected under current laws. Only one responded. The idea that a company can use eminent domain for something that may or may not be a public good can sound crazy to people.
Eminent domain is something that is avoided at virtually all costs because you don't want that fight. Of course, laws are established that eminent domain is an option that can be pursued through the court systems, and sometimes it's for very just causes.
So in this case, how do you balance the rights of someone who paid to own the land that they live and maybe even work on to with a corporation or corporate interests that are important to the economy of Louisiana?
Carefully and prayerfully, and through the established judicial systems, and all of us have to consider what is the greater good.
Outside Louisiana, the rules are a little different. South Carolina banned pipelines from using eminent domain altogether. And in Texas, a 2011 ruling said companies have to prove that a project is in the public good before they can take the land in court. Louisiana law just assumes that from the start. When we asked for comment, Bayou Bridge Pipeline's parent company, Energy Transfer Partners, told us, quote, "On the Bayou Bridge project, 99% of the land has been acquired through private negotiations with landowners, and we reserve any legal option as an absolute last resort." They also stated that $71 million has been paid to landowners in compensation. When you look at the amount of money they paid you, and you compare it to all the inconveniences on your property, do you feel like you got a good deal?
No, I don't. But it wasn't about money in the first place.
Notre Dame has survived 850 years of war and revolution to become one of the most visited sites in Europe. Now, it's starting to fall apart. The famous flying buttresses are beginning to shift, and if one falls, it could threaten the integrity of the entire cathedral. Michel Picot is a Parisian-born engineer and archaeologist.
Donc là, nous sommes au niveau du chevet de la cathédrale et on peut voir à la fois toutes les beautés architecturales de la cathédrale, mais aussi les dégradations qui ont été infligées par le temps. On voit là les pierres, des bouts de pinacle qui sont tombés en fait, ou qui ont été ramenés au sol parce qu'ils manquaient de tomber.
The deterioration isn't new. Since the 19th century, engineers have used stopgap renovations to keep the building from collapsing.
Et si l'on tourne encore, on va encore voir d'autres exemples de pinacles qui ont été consolidés avec des barres de fer.
Experts now say the building needs an urgent structural overhaul that could cost more than $185 million. But no one in France is leading the charge to raise the money, because there isn't really anyone in the position to do it. The cathedral itself belongs to the government, which lets the archdiocese use the cathedral for free, an awkward arrangement that makes fundraising almost impossible, because everyone thinks it's someone else's problem.
En France, il y a une loi qui veut qu'il y ait une séparation entre l'État et l'Église. Donc l'État ne peut pas intervenir au niveau de la rénovation de Notre Dame. Donc au niveau de la rénovation, normalement c'est l'Église qui doit prendre ça en charge.
But the church and the government together have raised less than a third of what they need. So the French are turning to an ally who's bailed them out in the past, the United States.
C'est normal que eux, de leur côté, ils ont tellement d'argent qu'ils ne savent pas quoi en faire, et qu'ils rénovent aussi, qu'ils nous aident aussi un peu à rénover notre patrimoine. Nous, on a peut-être d'autres choses à faire avec l'argent. Hein. Ça me semble être un équilibre.
So we will start by the elements of architecture which are the most vulnerable, which are the flying buttresses of the cathedral.
Picot launched a foundation called Friends of Notre Dame, registered in Washington, so that Americans can make tax-deductible contributions to a landmark that many fell in love with as tourists.
C'était très bien Seth Bernstein and his wife Tony Bernstein.
So we have very small donors, we have major donors. They are giving tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wesley Johnson is one of the group's first major contributors from the US.
It's incredible when you think about it, the fact that Notre Dame has survived for 850 years. Even at that time, they were sourcing raw materials from all over Europe, so the timber would come from Scandinavia. And I thought, how cool is that? This is like 1400, and it's already like, globalization.
Johnson wouldn't tell us how much he donated, but he's now working with Picot to help galvanize fundraising. And in the few months that the foundation has been operating, they've already managed to bring in a quarter of the total.
I received a letter from an old lady in a retirement center, I think in Arizona, something like that, who sent a check of $10 and with a very kind letter about her love for Paris and for Notre Dame de Paris. France was the first friend of the new American country. We now count on your help and on your support.